Hello everyone, and welcome to True Words Aren't Beautiful. As you can see, I am joined by a special guest today who insists on being seen, at least by me. And so, because she loves the attention, I am going to give her part of the spotlight today, because that is what she deserves, especially because an encounter of the past couple days involving my dog Bowie here is very important in relation to what I'm going to talk about today. So, there's a bit of a preamble. I was walking her the other day, and she had just stepped off the sidewalk before incoming traffic headed our way. And she refused to listen to me telling her, "Come on, Bowie." She didn't notice I was tugging her leash. And so I had to give her a bit of a slap on her side to move her onto the sidewalk so that she would not get hit by an incoming truck that somehow was interested in speeding up as soon as Bowie stepped into the middle of the road. Obviously, Bowie was scared, tail between her legs, whimpered a bit because she thought that she did something wrong and I was hitting her. It took only a few seconds for her to realize, no, her dad wouldn't hurt her. Her dad just didn't want to lose her. And then the next day, same thing almost happened again, where one of these Christian churches, or some people like to identify it as a cult, the INC, which stands for Iglesia Ni Cristo, a church member in their SUV drove by and nearly ran into Bowie, missing her by this much had I not pulled her away, even though they saw me from a distance, right there in the pedestrian area, because they wanted to cut a corner in order to get to their church. So, twice, I had moments where I had to be a bit more forceful, whether it was giving her a bit of a slap and pulling her firmly so she wouldn't get hit by a car because she didn't seem to notice that. And as I meditated on it, I got this message from the universe which said, well, that is how your higher self, that is how God, the Tao, the gods, whatever it is you want to identify it as, that is how the universe works. If you're not paying attention when we call you, we might be a little more firm and tug on your leash, and if you're not listening, we might need to whack you to get you to move, because you could hurt yourself. And so, with that in mind, one of the things that I'm going to talk about today is how I am going to be stepping back for a while from interacting with most people and social media. Thank you, Bowie. So, if you saw my last video and you were able to handle it, because I did have some explicit content there, there is a lot of hurt that I'm still processing. There are a lot of attachments I need to entangle. And there's a lot of self-exploration, because my journey that I started in nature and in the mountains has not ended. I still have to go deeper into myself in order to resolve a lot of things. So I'm stepping back for a while. I'm not totally cutting myself off, because no man is an island. And when you isolate yourself, when you get stuck with your thoughts, and those are not healthy thoughts, it's very bad for you, no matter how well-meaning it is. If you look at how solitary confinement, a punishment that was created initially with the intention of improving someone's relationship with God, ends up creating all sorts of psychoses and harm, then what more when you self-isolate, or when you're incarcerated in solitary confinement? But then you ask, how is it that the yogis and the monks are able to seclude themselves in the forest, in the mountains, in the shrines, in their caves? And I can say, they're not stuck in one space. They are not totally ripped apart from reality. They have their framework, they have the freedom to get up and move, and they've lost or they've abandoned the idea of the egoic self. When you are forced to question yourself in solitary confinement, you go crazy because you lose your sense of self. The monks and the hermits transcend their selves. They transcend the self, rather. They abandon the ego. The ego does not serve them very well. And my egoic self right now is still hurting from past heartbreaks, regrets, guilt, ex-girlfriends, and the fear of harming others as well through actions or inactions. In stepping back right now, I'm decontextualizing. You can do that when you're meditating, which is what some people do in Vipassana retreats or insight meditation, where they do a 10-day retreat run by volunteers. If you've never done it, it's recommended you try it at least once in your life. It's free the very first time, then after that you donate and you can help out if you want. But when I meditate, it's a more directed and purposeful approach to decontextualizing, stepping away from myself, getting out of my head and my emotions and my identity. And I do that as well with my various interests, because it's a lot of neuroplasticity, where the mind can adapt and evolve and transform by decontextualizing. I learn from observation and from stepping back, and I catch patterns. Just like I observe patterns in other people as well, in different contexts and observation. For example, when I used to draw in my art classes, in the very beginning, my art teacher used to say, "Can I show you something?" And he showed me a photo of me like this, drawing. And he says, "Why do you need to look so close to the paper when you can see perfectly fine from a distance?" And so he would have me draw for 10 to 15 minutes, and then he would ask me to step back, not look at the paper, not think about it. And then I would come back. And then I'd say, okay, I see it very differently now, since I'm not so intensely drawn into this. Other times I would be drawing while standing with the paper or the canvas hung on the wall. And I'd walk back and forth, going in and out, around, and trying to get different perspective. And that allowed me not to get too stuck in the process and lost in the process, thereby making the process incorrect, because I don't give myself time. I don't give myself space or perspective. And that's also in martial arts, because if you get tunnel vision, you might not realize that you could trip and fall in the environment around you, or someone could be coming from behind you to hit you with a beer bottle or a chair. So it's very good to pause and reflect and to step away from things that you can't resolve and you can't understand in the moment. And there's also the idea of timing. Just like you have to wait and go through each step properly when you're cooking, such as when you boil with salt, or you add the salt after you're boiling particular dishes, which can affect the potatoes, for example, in an Armenian dish that my friend told me about, which I don't know what particular dish that is, but he told me it's how he recognized timing was important for his own yoga and martial arts. And that timing also includes the level or dimension of rhythm, as you see with music, where you have to keep up with the beat, the timing, and the pacing in order to make a song, because there's a very big difference between 150 beats per minute and 60 beats per minute. Anyone who listens to the various genres I do, from heavy metal to punk rock to IDM, will understand what I'm talking about, especially when you look at drill and bass or spunk jazz. Then when I look at board gaming, it's also great because both sides in my brain are used. The left side, which is for strategizing, planning, and reasoning, qualitative and quantitative reasoning. But there's also the immersive part of the right side, the creativity, where I put myself in the fantasy and science fiction worlds or the horror worlds, of those board games. And only by knowing both the logical rules of the game and the setting do I manage to get myself out of my head and for a moment forget that I'm Johnny C and think that I am, well, a gear lock in the game Too Many Bones, or one of the nature spirits in Spirit Island, or a mage knight in Mage Knight, or an ornithologist in Wingspan, and a zookeeper in Ark Nova, or the planet Earth itself in Earth, or the final girl in Final Girl. Of course, I also see that when I'm in mountaineering, or when I'm in nature and the environmental shift. In each of those different contexts, I learn about myself, and when I learn about myself, I also learn about other people, because I had a friend over, and I was observing the way he played a board game I taught him, Spirit Island. And I saw how he was so focused on how to win, on different strategies. And I said, hey, bro, we're not even halfway through the rule book. Don't worry about strategies and winning yet. Learn the game first. Or people in nature where they think that, okay, well, I'm a tough guy. I do rock climbing, competitive rock climbing on the walls. I go to those gyms 3 times a week. I can do mountaineering, and that's a totally different skill because it's not just the fitness, the strength, and the resilience. It's also the planning and the puzzle solving that you have when you are on the trails. And the other soft skills, such as situational awareness and socializing, and also cultural sensitivity, particularly when it's not just me as a foreigner with locals here, it's also the different classes and a totally different culture between a privileged guy like him who has a family that invests a lot in him as an only child versus a lot of these people who have to provide for their families working in call centers. So being able to go between different contexts and put Johnny C aside for a moment allows me to have some understanding and recognition of how a different environment can shape someone greatly and influence them for better or for worse. And this also brings me to some of my own sadness and loss and grievance, and some of the people I know who I've lost over the years, or people who have lost themselves over the years because of despair and anger. And I'm no different to that because I got into all that anger with politics. I got into all that anger with martial arts. I got into all that sadness with just being a human being, which involves risks, losses, calculated risks, and necessary losses. But those are still part of the learning experience in your soul journey. Another thing that I meditated upon was yesterday when someone showed me pictures of 2 twins, 2 aborted fetuses. It was uncomfortable to see, but it's also something that is important to meditate on. And as I meditated on that, I thought of several things. I asked myself, all those times I was in such deep hurt and despair, and I wished I didn't exist. I wished I was never born. I wished I could just die and escape, just like I tried in November last year, or many times in high school and college. I asked myself, what do these fetuses think? If you could ask their spirits, knowing how much suffering exists in this world, would they still want to be born? And as I meditated upon it, I got a resounding yes, because if, for example, everyone wants to play a game, let's say Mario Kart, there's enough controllers for 4 players, and there's 2 hours of gaming time before everyone needs to leave. You got 20 guys in a room, and they all want to play, and one girl wants to jump in and say, hey, come on, let me play too. And they say, all right, wait your turn, take a number. And so all the other guys and girls get to play, but by the very end, only half that group has had a chance to play. and the other half hasn't had a chance to experience winning or losing or even picking up the controller. 5 of those people who did play were pissed off because they kept losing badly. The other 5 enjoyed it and they won. And amongst those 5 who won, some thought, okay, this is cool, but not really that great, not my thing. Others said, this is the best thing ever. And amongst the losers, yeah, some of them had the exact same idea. It wasn't their thing, but they didn't really put too much thought into it. Others thought it was the greatest thing ever, and others hated it. But those 10 who didn't get to play, how do you think they felt? Not having had a chance to pick up a controller, not having had a chance to experience it for themselves. That is what my meditation told me about those unborn fetuses. And I ask people, if you knew that as well, would you want to be born knowing all the hurt and pain you suffered in life? All the mistakes and regrets and guilt you have, just like I do? And some say, yeah, I wouldn't want to be born if it meant going through this suffering. But that's because they experienced it. They had a chance to say, no, I wouldn't do this. Versus those who never got a chance to try, and they still wish they could know what it was like to taste defeat and to taste joy. And I also think of a story I read from the Ramayana, or as some Americans like to say, the Ramayana, which I've been told is the incorrect pronunciation. The story of a river spirit or river goddess who married a man, and she asked him to not look at what she was doing or question it. And one thing she was doing was she was drowning infants, and the man was horrified that she was doing that. And she says to him, your human mind cannot comprehend what I'm doing. These infants have the spirits of rishis or sages. If they are born into these lives and have to live a full lifetime, we are depriving the universe of their ability to reincarnate quickly and to continue serving their purpose as sages. By drowning them as infants, we are helping them fulfill their karma ahead of time. But you can't understand this because of your human mind. Just like Job in the Bible, when his 3 friends were reprimanding him saying, it's all your fault. This happened because you weren't good enough, or this happened because life is unfair, or this happened because whatever reason. And when God came to explain to Job and his friends, he looked at the 3 friends of Job and says, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Don't tell him why I did what I did. Don't tell him that you know my job. And they looked at Job and said, Job, you don't know what I did, why I did what I did. So let me explain something to you. You think you understand how the universe works? Tell me how it works. I'd love to know as the guy who's running it. So, if we take that to understanding people in different contexts, when we get this tunnel vision, just like the frog in the well that thinks it sees the entirety of the sky but only sees a small corner, we don't know. That is the same as the 3 blind men holding the trunk, the hide, and the tail of the elephant, who think that they have the best perspective of the elephant, but only know parts of it. And it's because of this ignorance, this lack of awareness, we have a lot of depression and suffering. But that depression and suffering can be made worse when we do know better, but we choose to forget. And you say, well, there are a lot of people who just don't have free will. Because one thing I learned in my yoga practices are 80% of our lives are predetermined and 20% are free will. It's the same as going down a river. There's a route or there's a destination you're meant to go, and there's certain checkpoints. But you can choose different forks, and you can choose to make your life more enjoyable. But you can't paddle the entire time, because eventually you're going to resist the current and you're going to overexert yourself. So there are times you just need to let it be and let the journey take you, while also doing your part when it's time to paddle appropriately. So, when I think of times where I didn't really exercise my free will because I didn't know any better, yeah, those are crimes, like the times I was abused, there were the times I was told I was less than what I am. But then I realize in that moment, I'm not responsible for what was done to me necessarily, but I'm responsible how I continue to relive and react to those things that I experienced, those traumas, those abuses, and the guilt and the regret that I deal with. When I replay those moments in my head, say, God, what an idiot I am. God, why did I let that happen to me? Well, it happens to me because I allow it to replay in my head, and I can't change that. Just like worrying never improves anything. Worrying makes things worse. It invites that reality from the worry as opposed to just letting things be. And when you replay things in your head and your heart, just like I'm doing right now, it doesn't change the past. Well, what I'm trying to do is I replay them. I want a second chance with many things that I screwed up. And I'm doing everything to be better, to not only earn that second chance, whether it's with ex-girlfriends, or work, or art, but to deserve it. And if I don't deserve it, then to be free from this, to embrace my Buddha nature. But part of embracing Buddha nature doesn't mean burying my head in the sand like an ostrich, or sticking my head up my own asshole. Sure, you might say, well, there are these renunciates, there are these ascetics who go into caves or go into the wilderness, away from society because they don't want to accumulate any more karma, whether those entanglements come from dealing with people or bad decisions and temptations. And I say, well, what they're doing is they're turning inward, and by going inward, they're connecting to God. And I say, well, there is a class of yogins who are somewhat renunciates, where they're detached from the world, but they still have families, they'll fulfill their obligations, but they pay no special mind to arguing or politics. They fulfill their role, whether they're farmers or they're corporate workers, but they don't get caught up in the idea of being a manager or a CEO or anything like that, or Republican or Democrat, an Asian or a black man or whatever. And that is me, because I do have my material comforts, but I also don't get totally attached to them, even if I do absolutely love my dogs, as you saw from my adorable dog Bowie earlier. So I'm seeking to be better, and if I don't deserve or get what I seek, I at least want to be free. I'm now thinking of two stories, one I mentioned before, from Chinese philosophy, where the saying is 守株待兔, which talks about the farmer who saw a rabbit crash its head into a stump, and he immediately was relieved to find he didn't need to work or hunt because he had a free meal. And then he wasted the rest of his life waiting for another rabbit to crash its head against the tree stump. And people in China and Taiwan talk about 守株待兔in reference to waiting for and wasting opportunities instead of seeking and creating them. But that's a big contrast between Dattatreya, one of the sages, the Sadgurus in Hinduism, who talks about waiting and accepting. Because he describes the python. The python waits for its prey and accepts when it comes and doesn't go seeking. Just like the yogin will accept happily whatever comes, but doesn't despair when it doesn't. So we put those stories together. The farmer who saw the rabbit wasn't expecting a rabbit. It just happened. He was living his life as he was, and then it came unexpectedly, and he accepted it. When he started to wait for the rabbit, that's when things screwed up. He wasn't doing the inner work, and he wasn't doing the daily work. The yogin, their daily work is inner work. Whether they are meditating, contemplating, helping others who they encounter, and wandering. And that is how they're able to accept. And so, Khentrul Rinpoche, a Vajrayana teacher I know about, refers to this as active patience, because being patient is not being passive. being patient also requires action. And how, you can say, well, how can you be patient if you're acting? Well, simple. If you're acting and putting a timeline on something, a schedule, that's not patience. But if you're acting, but you're paying no special mind to the timeline and the form it comes, you're focused on the process, as I say time and again, as opposed to the outcome. And that is patience. So when I look backwards, I wasted years crying about not knowing and not doing. Yet, out of necessity, I chose to experiment and accept that it's better to fail by trying and improve upon that than it is to avoid failure and never improve. So that's why right now I'm going inwards for the next few weeks to further free myself, though I will of course make myself available to those who wish to support me and those who wish to be seen and heard. I've been encountering people with various stages of struggle in life, particularly the relationships, and their situations sound a lot like mine. Those are karmic echoes and patterns that are externalized the more I do the inner work. And as I do the inner work, my teacher told me it's a chance to correct myself and correct the karmic pattern so it doesn't repeat itself in my own life, whether it's in my experience, in my relationships, or from observing the people around me. When you see that Buddha nature in others, their divine nature, you recognize the very same atoms of stardust that make up the universe are the same in all of us. So, I would rather be imperfect and struggle to show people how human I am, because it's relatable, instead of pretending to be perfect like so many false teachers do to attract people who are insecure and looking for self-validation, which also validates these false teachers and teachings and also fills their pockets with money. I would rather take their criticism because it's worth it to reflect and refine who I am than to argue with those who refuse to hear and try to prevent them from getting ripped off from following improper teachings and ideas, such as those red pill echo chambers promoting misogyny, or those girl boss fourth wave feminists promoting misandry. I find myself distanced from politics and in favor of humanity, and sadly even one side is protecting itself, such as Ukraine from Russia and the Philippines from China. There's still a dehumanizing approach from the people rightfully defending themselves, their right to exist, their territories, that leads them to write off their aggressors and the misled supporters of those aggressors as stupid instead of being compassionate. It's hard to be compassionate, though, when no one tries to talk to others as human beings with other human beings. Instead, we look at them as meat golems full of anger, insecurity, arrogance, victimhood, and entitlement. People make false conclusions because they don't understand, and they look at others who don't make the same conclusions as stupid. And that's exactly how they see themselves, because you can only see in others what you see in yourself. And I've made that mistake before. If you look at people's tendencies in various contexts, it tells me about what I would be like if I were in their shoes, because I do not have their experiences, values, memories, or identity. I only know what Johnny C. would do in a particular situation. But there are some things I can never fathom. I can never fathom being a woman. I could never fathom having a period. I can never fathom having a child. I can never fathom trans women as well, because I don't suffer from gender dysphoria. I can only be compassionate and say, I don't know what you're going through, but I can feel the very same thing that you struggle with, the hurt. And that perception is very different when you step back. I think of the Trifalmadorians, aliens from the fourth dimension, in Kurt Vonnegut's work, particularly Slaughterhouse-5. We humans see ourselves as beings walking on two legs, walking from moment to moment. But the Trifalmadorians see us as a centipede, seeing the beginning of our lives to the end of our lives, a baby here to an old man over here. All those moments existing simultaneously. That's why when we talk about loss, when we talk about the future or the past, the Tralmadorians can't comprehend that because they can see differently, and they do see differently. They don't know the difference between the front of the leg of the centipede and the back of the leg of the centipede. The front legs or the back legs, rather. Just like in the other novel, Flatland, you can have two-dimensional beings who can't comprehend the third dimension of the sphere. And one-dimensional lines can't comprehend triangles and squares. And us in the third dimension, we can understand cubes, we see them, but we can't understand hypercubes. But we can conceptualize them, we just can't perceive them. In Suzuki Shinryu's book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, he talks about how the seed and the banyan tree that it grows into are the same being. They are different stages of the same being. So if I look at my past regrets and mistakes, and I look at my better self, and I look at the potential to be worse, they are all the same being. That's not to say someone was good once, they became bad, or was bad once, became good. They are all the same being. But you have to ask yourself, what happened in the middle of that growth process? You don't immediately stop being good and start being evil, because to divide good and evil in a man's heart, as Solzhenitsyn said, and to cut the evil out of your heart, is such a limited view of reality, because we are complex beings. We all have red blood, we all hurt, and we all agree that pineapples on pizza are strange, but absolutely delicious. I bring myself now to perspective and false conclusions and identities again. There are a number of people I know who are rich, objectively rich, but they say they're middle class, or they say, I'm broke. They are not middle class, and they are not broke, but they have a poverty mindset, a romanticized ideal of what it means to be middle class or to be poor. An example of that are a couple of people I know who have parents who bought their home for them, or bought their condo, bought their car, paid for all their insurance, all their meals, and their fuel is paid for. These kids are just miserable, they don't have enough spending money. And these people spend a lot of money because they lack purpose. They're empty inside, they're depressed. And when I talk to them and I say, hey, you're depressed, you talk about being broke, but every month I'm just glad I'm able to pay rent and pay my bills and take care of my dogs. Your mom and dad pay for everything. You have a car. You don't have to worry about your meals. And then you tell me that you're miserable and you're broke? And I am by no means broke. I just don't have income right now. I have a small stipend that pays the bills, but that's it. I have a couple of students who pay a number of bills, but that's it. I can enjoy myself, but I lack the income in dollars to pay back my credit card debt. I lack enough income in local peso currency to live the best life possible, but I'm still living pretty well because I have the opportunity to work on myself and not starve, even if I have to make those decisions about what I spend on each month. I'll give you another example of a person I met who said, I tried homelessness, it's overrated. And as I'm talking to him, I'm thinking of my own experience when I was homeless myself after my father died. Sleeping on the Queens line in New York. Taking showers in public bathrooms to avoid looking homeless. Trying to look presentable, avoiding questions, denying that I was homeless. Versus a guy who was just staying on friends' couches. And yes, that is a form of homelessness, but he talked about homelessness as being helpless and desperate. In truth, this guy's homelessness was just an inconvenience because He insulted his family, and he just didn't want to face them or humble himself, even though he was never kicked out. He was never at risk of starving. He had friends who took care of him, but he played the victim game so well that he appeared on TV and got thousands of dollars in donations, and became the boy who cried books. He talked about how suicidal he was. I said, cool. And he talked about how brilliant he was. And I said to him, all right, have you ever read The Catcher in the Rye? And he said, of course I am. I'm the boy who cried books. And I said, then you will remember this very pertinent line in the book, where they say, the mark of an immature man is one who seeks a noble death. The mark of a mature man is one who seeks a noble life. You decide who you are. So this guy who went around trying to be clever, trying to be smart and special, boasting about who he was and playing victim, getting your pity but also at the same time making you feel worse about yourself. And I don't know how he managed to convince people to make that work and pay him not just attention but money. Was immediately humbled when he was challenged. I then also look at a statement made by an American woman who was a teacher at my high school, a private international school. There were a lot of behaviors from rich kids that were tolerated because they bankrolled the international school. It was a corporate business, there's no mistake about it. People who failed classes came from rich families, but they were still given a diploma because they paid the salaries of the instructors and the investors and the board of trustees. You had kids who farted in class. You had kids who set lockers on fire. You had kids who chased people with a BB gun, and they were still allowed to stay in the school because their parents were wealthy and influential. And this teacher, an African American woman, told my teacher, a white American, who in turn told me that these rich kids are just like kids from the ghetto. They are neglected, they have no guidance, and they're left to raise themselves, except they're raised with money and privilege compared to these kids in the hood who have no money, but they do similar things because there are no parents to teach them values, developing qualities, habits, and mores and scruples. They are bored, they are stuck, and they feel helpless. So, this is a very human condition. And this is how I know I'm not alone, but I am hurting quite a lot. I think of this Holocaust denier who thinks he has perspective because he says, oh, I'm just offering a counter-argument. You have to see the other side of the story, which is absurd. The idea that all perspectives have value opens the door to people like him in Holocaust denial. You add nothing to the conversation. There is no material value or rational argument when you're adding stuff that is based off of weird ideas and speculation that have been disproven from facts and forensics, records, science, showing how the concentration camps existed. The people who deny them will dismiss those facts and put together a narrative about how an entire cultural group is evil, even though we have multiple records of the evidence and the cover-up. Another example, again, a rich kid farting in class and saying, oh, this article about black people doesn't talk about Asians, so it's racist against Asians. These arguments make no sense. These arguments do not contribute to the conversation. But these arguments, what they contribute to your understanding, are people who are lost in their own self-certainty, in their own self-aggrandization, and their own delusions of grandeur and brilliance. Just like a couch potato who watches UFC fights while smoking weed in his lazy boy, thinks he knows how to fight better than the person in the ring. One thing I can say is, I don't know everything. When I step back, I can see a bit better, but I don't know how much the universe works. I don't know everything, but I can feel many things. And the more I feel, I don't want to feel less. What I want is to understand and help others who are struggling, hurting, and suffering as well. So in this time while I work on bettering myself and continuing to heal and transform, I'm going to be limiting my interactions with people and some old patterns, but I'm not going to totally be isolated. I would prefer interactions based off of if someone has an emergency, if someone has an opportunity for me to make some cash, because I could use them right now. We always could. Whether it's someone coming to me for a consultation, a workshop, or short studies with me, or someone just really needs something from me. They want to unload, they want to be seen and heard. I offer that to them, but my priority right now, taking care of me. So I'm going to step back for a while, step away from being Johnny C, go and dissolve my identity, do the things I like, from my cooking, to my music, to my drawing, to my gaming. And from that, go from one reality to the next before re-entering reality and the identity that is Johnny C. Anyway, that's all I can remember right now as I start to lose myself in these thoughts and emotions. If you want to support me, please feel free to reach out. If you want to criticize me, you're welcome to do that, but I'd appreciate it if you could do so constructively. If you have nothing to say, cool. If you watched this video, thank you for your time. You've given me time, and that's all I can ask for. I hope this video has done as much good for you as I hope it could possibly do. Thank you. Much love.